This week, a Thanksgiving service was held at Westminster Abbey to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the National Health Service. The occurrence of such a ceremony, at a place of worship no less, has rudely awoken me from my slumber. When did the NHS become a national religion? Above scrutiny and beyond question. It's become sacrosanct, haloed above ordinary political debate. If we're told not to question something, then that's precisely the one thing we should all be questioning. The government plans to inject £20 billion into the system, funded by borrowing and taxation, despite claims of a mythical Brexit dividend. Now, those plans may act as a stopgap, but it won't be enough. Urgent, alternative thinking around health is a necessity. Dogma, more of the same, and cash alone will not fix the problem. Nor will shouting down people who genuinely seek solutions in a different way. Just as in religion, I would be more suspicious of the person crying heretic than the alleged heretic themselves. I, for one, wish to keep an open mind about the future of our NHS.
Martin, you're right. I mean, it is one of the things we worship almost in this country, the National Health Service. It's seen as a great service for all, that we gave free healthcare at the point of delivery. I mean, you've only got to go back to remember the Olympics and the opening of the Olympics.
Of course, Danny Boyle ceremony.
Yeah, Danny Boyle ceremony. What did we really celebrate in that? First of all, we celebrated the Industrial Revolution, the first in the world in Britain, and then we celebrated the National Health Service. So we have turned into something very special. And I agree with you, it does make it difficult for any politician to push through change, because any politician who suggests any sort of change gets attacked for saying they want to get rid of the National Health Service, which they don't.
Yeah. Well, I had to think twice before picking this subject today and thinking of what it was I was going to say to open up the conversation, because I feared that attack. And I'm somebody who has actually said the exact opposite, not only on this show, I think the last time you raised the topic, Michelle, but I disputed some of what you said, but also on my LBC radio show. I have long championed the NHS, and I actually appreciated Danny Boyle's ceremony. But what struck me was the fact that this was in a place of worship. We had this ceremony. And I, upon learning, I didn't watch it, but upon learning that this happened, it kind of something hit me, because I'm somebody that's had a past moving away from dogma, and religious dogma to be precise. And it got something going in my mind about the dangers of not being able to question something. It may be that after questioning something, we end up at the same answer as the best answer is what we already had. But we won't know that unless we go through that process.
Well, I mean, the trouble is, it's always the allegation that always comes back is about privatisation.
Yeah.
And that's the great fear. Whereas there are other ways, I suspect, of running a health service that don't require privatisation. But I don't rate our chances of ever introducing them. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I disagree. I have to disagree. I mean, first of all, I think
with my questioning,
I think nothing should be closed from debate.
Yeah.
I don't like any debate being shut down.
Yeah.
So I think if you feel that it's a no-go area, that you're kind of censored from even asking questions, I would support you that that's not healthy. You know, we should scrutinise and challenge things.
But does that exist?
Yeah, I personally, I mean, I think in a way, like, you've managed to find the one thing. I feel like we live in such divided times. We disagree about everything. The one thing that most of the country seem to agree on is that they value the NHS, and 80% of people, when polled, said they would support paying 1p extra to increase funding for the NHS, and that remarkably is consistent among Labour and Tory voters, 80%, 82%. So it's almost the one thing on which there does exist social consensus. And I don't really agree with your characterisation of it as a religion. I mean, I did some research into this for my book, and it's really interesting that, for me, it's an identity question. And actually, if you look at Britain in the 20th century, modern British identities were kind of remade after the Second World War, and there is some research that suggests there was a new kind of social contract. You know, society was changing, the role of women was changing, class structures were changing, there was new kind of relationships with social housing, and one of the pillars of this modern British identity was this offering that the state said, we will provide a basic welfare net, we will offer universal healthcare. And that is why Britain is held up as an example in the world. There are so few countries that have made those kinds of social rights.
You know, we keep on, we kid ourselves that the NHS is the envy of the world. It is not the envy of the world, because nowhere else in the world has this system being copied. Nowhere. You know, let's talk about that. Is true. Let me finish. Danny Boyle's ceremony made it look like it was the pride of Britain and the envy of the world. It is not. It has become a sacred cow, and it's a failing sacred cow. Have we forgotten what happened in 2013? seen Sir Bruce Keogh's report into the National Health Service after what happened at mid-staffs. 1,200 people died needlessly, and they died of ridiculous things like hunger, like thirst, like bad hygiene, like neglect. That is still happening in our health service, and we can't be frightened to talk about this. And this is the problem here. You know, anyone who criticises the NHS, they're seen as ungrateful and treacherous, and they're seen as peeing on the work of doctors and nurses. No, we have to look at all of that, and we have to look at the work of doctors and nurses and criticise.
There's a huge amount of criticism and scrutiny around mid-staffs, and rightly. And I don't think it's fair to judge an institution as big or ambitious as the NHS by the failure, and the failures are very serious. But
people dying of starvation.
We could criticise every single institution written from its failures. Can I just quickly bring in a grab, because Greg Milam, the Sky correspondent, made this really powerful piece about healthcare in America, and this is the opposite of the NHS. And I just want to show you the reality for people who are poor in America when it comes to health.
In one of the richest countries on earth, for many people, this is what healthcare looks like. A mobile medical unit in a neighbourhood of Seattle is the only option for some, even those who have jobs.
A number of clients will come onto the van, and it's the first time they've seen a physician in 5, 10, or 15 years.
If you're a person that comes down with a serious illness in this country, and you go in and you have Medicare or whatever, and you have private insurance, you're treated very well. And I think if you're poor and they don't really care as much, they just really don't care.
I think, for me, if people are defensive about the NHS, it's because we all know that nobody would create that now if we were starting from scratch. We've moved so far away from these ideals where we try to create fairness in society. Our society's become radically more since then, and that is what people
I just want to say here that I'm going to bring Michelle in, but I just want to say that I think there is a danger that we go to the American example, which is a terrible example for health service. But Greg's point that there are other services in Europe even that are free at the point of access but aren't our system. And I think there are other alternatives to explore that don't end up with a higher than average death rate for the 12 most common causes of death in hospitals. 8 of them we check in our NHS. So there needs to be, and we also know that we can't keep throwing money at it. And so the consensus you refer to is precisely what I'm saying perhaps needs to be questioned.
It's been underfunded for years.
No, I'm not saying we have. Hang on. I'm not saying we have, Michelle. I'm saying we know we can't. Doesn't mean we have been. I'm saying we know we can't keep doing it.
So I completely agree with you, and I think the NHS has become a political football. I think everyone recognises that we need something, but I would actually say that what needs to happen is a proper root and branch investigation of the NHS. We've spoken about this before. It needs a proper review of, is the model that we have fit for purpose? What is the purpose that we actually want it for? And when I covered this topic a few weeks ago on here about the funding, because I was saying that I personally wouldn't pay extra tax until I was assured that the tax I was currently paying was being spent efficiently. So ever since I said that, I've received so many emails and contacts to me from people that work within the NHS who have said they don't want to be named, but they have listed to me so many ways and inefficiencies and challenges and problems that they feel, having worked and currently working in the NHS, that they feel is failing. And that concerns me.
You say there should be a root and branch investigation. There already has been. The National Audit Office has already said this year that it wastes billions. Simon Stevens has said that in certain areas it isn't fit for purpose. Lots of the people who work in the NHS, the big guns in the NHS, there was a guy recently who was in charge of Professor Tim Briggs, of National Director of the Clinical Quality of Efficiency. He says the NHS doesn't deserve the 20 billion until it gets its house in order. So yes, the big guns have already said.
I mean, what is it? The figure that struck me as quite remarkable that we found is that the NHS deals with 1 million people every 36 hours. Yeah. And you think, any institution, any organisation that is dealing on that scale, that is of that scale, will have inefficiencies. It always will. And the question is, I've always thought, is do you need to break up the NHS into smaller units so that actually you can manage them more effectively? I mean, this is like managing the old Soviet army.
Well, that's the problem. What you've just put your finger on is exactly the problem. It's the same model that was started in 1948 that's now managing that many people every hour. Well, so the model has to change.
Do you ever think when you go along to your GP, and I'm older than most of you, and I go along and I think, this is almost the same as it was 50 years ago.
Well, this is the problem.
I finally get a point. Right. And I go in, I sit there, I get 5 minutes with the GP, quicker. It gives me a prescription for something
But
to get me
Greg,
out.
let me ask you, because you're a business person. So if you work in business and you do business transformation, often that results in redundancy at quite a large scale. Do you think anyone would have the confidence to restructure the NHS in such a way that resulted in redundancy?
That's the problem.
Well,
because I don't think anyone has the...
Remember, there's an awful lot of people working, particularly in nurses.
And when I say redundancy, I don't mean in frontline doctors and nurses. I mean in back office.
Can I say that
that's the easy way out. Everybody always says we're going to take millions out of the health service because of the support system.
But do you think anyone's got the balls to actually restructure the NHS
The problem
in a
is
way?
you might even find people that have the audacity to do that. You will not find a politician with the guts to
and that's
appoint
what I mean.
them,
That's
to
what I
appoint
mean.
them,
That's
right?
what I'm saying.
Now,
In
look
terms
at-
of politicians,
because
I don't think we've got any.
Even our Conservative Prime Minister, let's hear what Theresa May had to say. She's throwing cash at the system, and let's watch this.
We cannot continue to put a sticking plaster on the NHS budget each year. So we will do more than simply give the NHS a one-off injection of cash. Under our plan, NHS funding will grow on average by 3.4% in real terms each year from 2019-20 to 2023-24.
Right, so congratulations, but my point, what I was saying to you, Afua, is that I think everyone agrees that it needs money, but everyone also agrees that no amount of money is going to fix all of its problems. And the problem with Theresa May, what she just said there, is we cannot continue to put a sticking plaster on the NHS with cash, and here's more cash.
But there's a
Something
huge
else is needed as well.
Room. That is so disingenuous, because the pressures on the NHS are not just from a lack of funding from the NHS.
That's what I just said.
They're also from the chronic situation in social care and and homelessness.
But we've got to start talking about solutions like countries like Belgium, like Switzerland. We've got to talk about insurance. We have to, because in all those countries, it is a matter of course they take out an insurance. We've got to stop kidding ourselves the NHS is free, because it isn't. It costs 124 billion quid.
Taking out insurance costs more. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but that's what the truth is. You spend more.